You know exactly what a Wild West sheriff looks like. Everybody does. You didn't learn it in a classroom. You absorbed it, the way you absorbed what a dinosaur looks like or what a ghost says. It's just in there. He's standing in the middle of a dusty street at high noon, a star pinned to his chest, hat pulled low, hand hovering over a six-shooter. Across from him, an outlaw in a black hat. Nobody moves. Somewhere a saloon door creaks. A tumbleweed rolls through, because of course it does. And then, 2 cracks of gunfire, a puff of smoke, and the bad guy folds into the dirt while the whole town watches from behind twitching curtains. The sheriff blows the smoke off the barrel. Roll credits. It's a fantastic image. Movies spent 100 years sanding it to a mirror shine, and honestly, I love it. If someone says the word sheriff, that's the guy who rides into your head. Alone, armed and quietly deadly, the one thin line between a decent town and total chaos. Here's the thing, though. That guy, the lone gunfighter keeping the peace with a fast draw, is almost entirely made up. Not exaggerated, not based on a true story, made up. And the real job, the actual day-to-day of an actual frontier lawman, was so much stranger and in places so much more boring and in the end so much more interesting that once you see it, you genuinely cannot go back to the movie version. So today we're going to take that shimmering high noon image and hold it up against what the records actually say, and I promise you 2 things. 1, it involved a truly heroic amount of paperwork, and 2, by the end, the thing you thought you knew about guns in the Wild West is going to be flipped completely upside down. Let's go. Let's be fair to the myth first, because it didn't fall out of the sky, and if you believe it, you are in overwhelmingly good company. You're standing shoulder to shoulder with about 1 billion other people and roughly every Western ever filmed. The story we all soaked up goes like this. The American frontier was lawless, wide open, every man for himself, a place where the only thing standing between you and pure anarchy was one brave man with a badge and a quick trigger finger. In this version, the sheriff is basically a walking court system. He's judge, he's jury, and when it comes down to it, he's the executioner too, settling disputes with lead because there simply isn't any other law for 1,000 miles in any direction. And the towns, in this story, are powder kegs. Gunfights are a Tuesday. Step out of the saloon at the wrong moment and you might catch a stray round from 2 drunks arguing over a card game. Everybody's armed, everybody's twitchy, and the graveyard on the hill fills up faster than the church. Now, and this matters, well, you can see exactly why this took hold. It's not a dumb thing to believe. The frontier was a genuinely real place with genuinely real danger. People truly did own guns, and lots of them. The distances were enormous. Formal government was thin and slow, and sometimes hundreds of miles away. Out in the actual wilderness, away from any town, you really were on your own against weather, wolves, and anyone who wished you harm. So the leap feels totally natural. The frontier was rough, and people had guns. Quietly becomes, the frontier was a non-stop shooting gallery run by gunslingers. That's a small, reasonable feeling step. The trouble is that the specific picture we end up with, the quick draw duel at noon, the lawless town, the sheriff as a one-man army, is precisely the part that dissolves the instant you go looking at what people at the time actually wrote down. And that's the good news for us, because these people wrote a lot down. Here's the first fact that refuses to fit. Brace yourself, because it sounds like I'm getting it backwards. A lot of those famous frontier towns had stricter gun control than they do today. I'll say it again slowly, because every instinct you have is going to reject it. Tombstone, Arizona, the town whose entire identity, whose t-shirts and tour buses and postcards is built on the gunfight at the OK Corral, had a law on the books in the 1880s that made it illegal to walk around town carrying a gun. According to Adam Winkler, a constitutional law professor at UCLA who wrote a whole book on the history of guns in America, Tombstone had much more restrictive rules on carrying firearms in public in the 1880s than it does right now. As he puts it, today you're allowed to carry a gun without a permit on the streets of Tombstone. Back in the actual Wild West, you weren't. And it gets better. In many of these towns, when you rode in, you were legally required to check your guns, like a coat at a fancy restaurant. In Wichita, Kansas in 1873, smack in the beating heart of the cowboy era, a visitor riding in would have seen a sign at the edge of town telling them, in plain letters, to leave their revolvers at police headquarters and pick up a check. A check. A little token. You handed your six-shooter to the law or the livery stable, they gave you your claim tag, and you collected your gun again on your way out of town. There's a photograph, taken in Dodge City, with a giant wooden billboard planted right in the middle of the main street. And the billboard reads, I'm paraphrasing only slightly, the carrying of firearms strictly prohibited. Right there, in Dodge City, the place whose name we literally use as slang for a dangerous situation, you need to flee. Let's get out of Dodge. That Dodge, with a no-gun sign nailed up over the main drag. So sit with the size of this for a second. The town we picture as the most heavily armed square mile in human history was quite often a place where one of the sheriff's corps daily duties was taking everybody's guns off them, the whole painting just tilted about 45 degrees. Now, let's find out who this sheriff actually was. Let me introduce you to two men, because this is where the real job finally comes into focus and the movie version starts to peel away. The first is a sheriff. We'll build him straight out of the historical record and call him Sheriff Tom. Now, Tom is not a mysterious stranger who drifted into town on a tired horse to clean the place up. Tom is an elected official. Sheriffs in the Old West were voted into office by the people of the county, which means, before anything else, Tom is a politician. He shook hands, he made promises, he probably bought a few rounds, he won an election. The badge on his chest wasn't pinned there because he was the fastest gun in the county. It was handed to him at the ballot box. And that means Tom is thinking constantly about getting reelected. Tom has opinions about the county budget. Tom has a rival who's going to run against him next cycle. And what does Tom actually do all day? He collects taxes. I'm not being cute. For a huge number of frontier sheriffs, the single biggest, most time-consuming part of the job wasn't chasing bandit. Then it was riding around the county collecting taxes. And here's the kicker. He got to keep a percentage of what he brought in. In Tombstone, Arizona's official state historian Marshal Trimble noted that a sheriff's official salary of around $2,500 a year could balloon through his cut of the taxes he collected to something like $30,000 a year. $30,000. The badge wasn't a ticket to gunfights. It was, functionally, one of the best-paying government jobs on the frontier because it was a tax collection franchise with a star on it. So picture Tom's real week. He runs the county jail and feeds the prisoners. He serves court papers or summonses, writs, the boring legal confetti that keeps a county running. He guards prisoners and escorts them to court. On a genuinely bad week, he carries out an execution because in a lot of places that grim duty fell to the sheriff too. And on a slow week, he does the stuff nobody puts in a movie. Some towns paid a small bounty for shooting stray dogs, so there's Tom collecting on a stray. He helps repair the wooden sidewalks. He's even been known, and I love this detail, to shovel horse manure out of the street because keeping the town clean was technically part of keeping the peace. The badge is real. The revolver on his hip is real. But most days, the most dangerous thing Sheriff Tom faces is a clerical error. Now the second man. Meet Marshal Virgil. And I'm modeling him on Virgil Earp, a real person who did a real job that almost nobody gets right. Because here's a distinction the movies smear into a single gray blob. A sheriff and a marshal are not the same thing. They're different jobs with different bosses in different places. A county sheriff, that's our Tom, was usually the highest elected official in the whole county, with authority countywide. A town marshal was something else, more like a modern city chief of police, appointed by the town council, keeping the peace strictly inside the town limits. And a U.S. Marshal was a third thing entirely, a federal officer, dealing with federal crimes across a whole territory, appointed all the way up at the level of the Attorney General. 3 jobs, 3 jurisdictions, 3 completely different chains of command, and the beautiful, confusing part is that one man could hold more than one of these at once. Virgil Earp, in Tombstone, was the town marshal and a deputy U.S. Marshal at the same time, which is exactly why, on the day of the OK Corral, he had the authority to deputize his own brothers on the spot. So the next time a movie shows you a sheriff chasing a bank robber across 3 states and into federal court, understand that it has quietly welded together about 3 separate offices into one heroic cowboy. Tom and Virgil would both find that hilarious. And then they'd argue about whose jurisdiction the bank robber was even in. But let's get out of the sheriff's office. Let's make this about you. Close the map and step into it. It's 1881. You're a cowboy, a real one, not a movie one, and you have just spent 2 brutal, grinding months driving a herd of longhorns up the trail from Texas. You are caked in dust so deep it's in your teeth. You smell like cattle and sweat and campfire smoke. Your hands are cracked, and for the first time in weeks, there's money in your pocket, real money, wages for the whole drive, and it is burning a hole straight through it. Up ahead, wobbling in the heat haze, is Dodge City. Whiskey. A hot meal that isn't beans. A bed that is not the hard ground with a saddle for a pillow. You have been dreaming about this exact moment for 60 miles, and the very first thing that happens when you reach the edge of town is bureaucracy. Before you get anywhere near the Long Branch Saloon, before the whiskey, before anything, a man tells you to hand over your gun. Not a suggestion, not a friendly tip. The law. You look up, and there's the sign. Plain as the sun. No firearms past this point. So you unbuckle the gun belt you have worn every single hour of every single day for 2 months. The one that has genuinely kept you alive against wolves and rustlers in the enormous, indifferent dark of the open plains, and you hand it across a counter to a man who gives you a small metal token in return. A cloakroom ticket. For your revolver. Now you're standing in the wildest town in the American West, and you are unarmed. And here's the strange part. So is nearly everyone else, at least everyone who just rode in like you did. The energy on the street is not tense standoff. It's more like a very crowded bar on a Saturday night where the bouncers are extremely serious and extremely well organized. You can drink, you can gamble, you can get loud, get stupid, lose your whole trail wage at faro, and yes, get into a good old-fashioned fistfight. And plenty of men did exactly that. Fists and drunkenness and broken furniture, that was the real texture of a rowdy night in Dodge. But if you pull a gun inside those town limits, you are not squaring up for a fair, cinematic duel at high noon. There is no tumbleweed. What you're actually facing is the sheriff, plus his deputies, plus, as one real cowboy memoir bluntly put it, their shotguns. Because your 1.6 shooter, they would happily remind you, is no match for a Winchester rifle and a face full of buckshot. On this street, the house always wins. And the house is the law. So you pocket your token, you leave the iron at the counter, and you go get your whiskey like a civilized man. Welcome to the Wild West. Okay, let's plant a flag and recap, because this is the load-bearing wall holding up the entire video. The myth says, the West was a lawless shooting gallery, kept barely in check by lone gunfighters with fast draws. The reality, as we're now seeing it, is close to the opposite. Heavily armed towns that systematically disarmed their visitors at the door, run by elected tax collectors and appointed peace officers whose days were mostly paperwork, jail duty, and sidewalk repair. That's a big claim. So now let me show you the receipts. Because this isn't vibes. Somebody actually counted. In 1968, a historian named Robert Dykstra did something that, incredibly, nobody had properly bothered to do before. He sat down with the actual primary sources, the newspapers, the court records, the death certificates from the 5 biggest, rowdiest Kansas cattle towns: Abilene, Ellsworth, Wichita, Caldwell, and the queen of them all, Dodge City. And across a 16-year window from 1870 to 1885, he counted the bodies, every single homicide, one by one. The number he arrived at across all 5 of the most notorious cow towns in America over 16 years was 45. 45 killings total. That works out to an average of about 1.5 deaths per town per cattle season. And crucially, that count even includes the justifiable killings carried out by the police themselves. So the truly wild towns, the ones whose names became shorthand for anarchy, were averaging somewhere between 1 and 2 homicides a year each. Not per week, not per month, per year. Now, I want to be honest with you, because this channel lives or dies on that, and there is a real fight among historians here. That low body count doesn't automatically mean these towns were safe by our standards. The populations were tiny. Dodge City had well under 1,000 permanent residents, so 1 or 2 killings a year still produces a homicide rate that, run through modern per capita math, looks alarmingly high. Some scholars argue Dijkstra undersells the violence, partly because he deliberately started his count only after each town had settled into a proper municipality with a police force. He left out the chaotic founding years, and those founding years were genuinely bloody. By the reckoning in the Encyclopedia of the Great Plains, Dodge City, in its first lawless year, before it organized a county and elected a sheriff, suffered somewhere between 16 and 19 violent deaths. Then the sheriff shows up, the town organizes, and the killing drops off a cliff. For years afterward, sometimes nobody died at all, which, if you think about it, doesn't weaken our story. It's the whole thesis in miniature. The violence was worst precisely when there was no law and no gun ordinance, and it collapsed the moment the boring, tax-collecting, paperwork-shuffling institutions of order showed up. The lawman didn't make the town wild. The lawman is what made it stop being wild. And now, the single detail that should put the high noon quick-draw fantasy in the ground for good. Writing in the Encyclopedia of the Great Plains, Dijkstra put it about as flatly as a historian ever will. His words, "Nobody died in a Hollywood-style duel." That's it, that's the quote. He goes on to note that fewer than 1/3 of the victims even returned fire, and a number of them weren't armed at all. Several deaths were simple accidents. Think about what that means. The face-to-face, hands-hovering, whoever draws fastest wins showdown. The single image that is the Western, the thing every one of us pictured back in Block 1, as an actual way that actual people actually died out there, it basically did not happen. Real frontier killings were ambushes, drunken arguments that got out of hand in a second. Someone shot in the back on a dark walk home. Messy, ugly, unheroic, and nothing at all like 2 men and a tumbleweed at noon. And here's the perfect capstone, the fact that ties the whole thing in a bow. Even the OK Corral was the most famous gunfight in the history of the United States, the one shootout everybody can name. It wasn't a duel. It wasn't 2 rivals meeting at high noon for honor. It was lawmen trying to enforce the gun ordinance. The Earps and Doc Holliday were, at bottom, attempting to disarm the Clantons and the McClorys, who were refusing to check their weapons like the law required. 2 of the men who died weren't even shooting. Ike Clanton, who helped start the whole thing, was unarmed by that point, ran, and survived. The most legendary shootout in the mythology of the Wild West was, at its absolute root, a fight about gun control. So here's the question that's been building under all of this. If the records are right there, the ordinances, the gun check tokens, the body counts, then why do we remember it so completely, so confidently? Backwards. And this, for me, is the part actually worth arguing about. There are 2 reasons, and they're both a little uncomfortable. The first is the obvious one. Hollywood. A 2-hour movie needs gunfights. The sheriff spent Tuesday riding the county to collect property taxes and then filed some writs. Does not sell a single ticket. No matter how historically accurate it is, the camera wants the duel. So the camera invented the duel over and over until the invention felt more real than the record. But the second reason is sneakier, and it didn't come from California. It came from the towns themselves. Because once the frontier closed, once the railroads changed, and the great cattle drives ended and the boom went bust, places like Tombstone and Dodge City looked around and realized their single most valuable remaining asset was their own violent reputation. So they leaned into it. Hard. They took the myth that was never even true, and they sold it back to us as a souvenir. And they still do. Today in Tombstone, you can watch a live reenactment of the OK Corral several times a day, and then walk out and buy a keychain. Deadwood runs quick draw contests at its annual festival. Dodge City has a Boot Hill you can tour. The very same town that once made you check your revolver at the edge of the street now makes a comfortable living pretending that it never, ever did. The gun ordinance got quietly written out of the brochure because come see the town with the strict gun laws and the excellent record keeping is a much harder sell than come see where the West was wildest, which lands us somewhere genuinely strange and genuinely worth chewing on. We took a real historical era, one in which frontier communities looked at a serious public safety problem and calmly decided, you can own all the guns you like, that's your business, but you are going to leave them at the edge of town while you're here. And over about a century, we rewrote it into its exact opposite, into a shimmering fantasy of total, glorious, unregulated firepower. The real Wild West and the Wild West of our imagination don't just disagree on a few details. On the specific question of guns, they believe opposite things. So here's the question I actually want to leave you holding, and I want you to fight about it in the comments with each other, not with me. When we reach for the Wild West today, when we invoke it in an argument about guns, or freedom, or rugged individualism, or what the frontier spirit really stands for, which West are we actually reaching for? The one that existed with its gun check tokens and its elected tax collectors and its billboards banning firearms downtown? Or the one Hollywood sold us and the old cattle towns were only too happy to cash in on? Because those are two very different places. And we seem to have picked the one that isn't real. Here's the thing about a myth like this one, though. It isn't just wrong, it's wrong in a direction. That's the part that always gets me. Of all the ways we could have misremembered the frontier, we didn't drift randomly. We drifted, every single time, toward more gunfire, more chaos, more lone heroes. Somebody, somewhere, at every step, preferred the version with the higher body count, and that's the version that stuck to our bones. And look, I'm not here to ruin cowboy movies for you. Please go watch them. They're wonderful. Ride off into the fake sunset with a clear conscience. All I'm asking is that you carry both pictures in your head at the same time. The myth, with its tumbleweeds and its noon duels and its smoking barrels. And the real thing, quieter and stranger and honestly better. The elected tax collector with a jail to run. The gun check token traded for a Colt. The dusty billboard telling a tired cowboy to leave the iron at the edge of town. Because that's the trade this channel keeps offering you. Over and over. You hand in a myth. A good one, a shiny one you were fond of. And you get a token in return. And later, when you walk back out into an argument about the past, you can collect something better than the myth, the actual thing that happened, which is almost always the more interesting story anyway. It usually is. Thanks for hanging out with me. Go carefully out there, and mind the sidewalk. Somebody worked hard to fix that.